Sorry, I got interrupted by a child, which I'm surprised it hasn't happened a lot more than it has. So we may we may have some choppy recordings today. Let's hope not. But anyway, so we've got uncertainty about love, which we're all certain about the uncertainty that we're experiencing with Chaucer when it comes to love. And we talked about, yeah, that's what it was that the ending is not as dramatically incomplete as it is in the House of Fame. It's kind of clearly, intentionally unfinished, which I think is a little bit less frustrating to us as we're readers. The hierarchy of birds, and we'll talk. Y'all had some really interesting things to say about that, and it seems to be that the right. I kind of agree with this and what other people say, which is that the more noble the food that you either gather or hunt, the more noble you are as a bird. So the raptors, the birds that kind of make their way by hunting, are the noblest. Then the ones that eat worms, at least that's a form of flesh eating. I think that's we're supposed to. Think we're supposed to be happy about that for those birds that they're at least um, killing and eating something. Then the seed fowl are even lower because they're sort of vegetarians. They're just sort of scavengers. And I think you're right. The idea of the serfs living off the land. Um, there's this idea of the gleaners. The people who would go behind the harvesters and pick up whatever was left. And if you were a harvester, traditionally you would leave a little bit for the gleaners who came behind. And I think the seed fowl are sort of meant to be like that. And then the waterfowl, yeah, they're just there are a lot of medieval lyrics about the ducks slobbering in the lake and the muckiness and slime of the lake or the river. So for whatever reasons, I mean, because in a lot of cases, of course, those birds are fishing. So you might, in one way of looking at it, think that they're being more assertive than the seed fowl, but they were definitely low on the food chain. And as anybody who's got a lot of experience with geese and ducks know, they're not always super pleasant or fun to be around. And I think that that was captured pretty well in the poem too. How do you compare this to the others? Sarah feels like it's more polished, and yeah, I think that's the answer that everybody's going to give. I like your sentence here. The poem does just not end, as was the case with the House of Fame. Rather, he allows the reader to come to a slow stop. Right, it's unfinished, but it's unfinished in a very finished way. I guess if that makes any sense. Um, and Right, we see this as being a more mature work for a lot of reasons, but for the reasons that you cite. Um, Becca has made a couple of good comments. You say here you get courtly love confused with general chivalry, and there really isn't a difference per se. There are probably the nomenclature is a little bit tricky. There's Phenamore, courtly love, and chivalry, and they all are mostly overlapping concepts, although there might be little bits and pieces of difference here and there. Um, and Becca applauds your idea of the long suffering eagle courtly love. I have to remind myself is usually unrequited, and that's right. It's unrequited, or at least unrequited for some time. Um, I don't know if that eagle had the soul of a bard, but perhaps he did. And right, the idea. I like your last sentence here in your second paragraph. The meat eaters of society hold sway over those who eat seeds. Yeah, these are sort of the wolves and the sheep of society in a manner of thinking. But of course, in Chaucer's world, people are born to their station in the same way that the birds are born into their species, so they don't really have control over where they fall in that. Sarah responds to Becca and says, "Thanks, Becca." Uh, Julie responds, agreeing with your hierarchy of birds. Um, yeah, y'all sort of seize on this point of the birds voting out of ranking order and what's the meaning of that. And I don't really know, but I think one thing that maybe is going on is we're seeing part of the comedy of the poem is watching the group of birds dissolve into chaos. And the idea is, even though you impose this sort of fancy metaphor on this group of birds, calling them a parliament and things like that, that in the end they are just birds, and they're going to degrade into sort of a cacophony of shrieks and shrills and hoots and quacks and everything else. So I've always just read it as the group falling into chaos because they can't be accorded, they can't agree, because they're birds partly, but it's just part of the fun of it. But I don't know. I mean, maybe there's a little social disorder going on. I'm not sure. I think it's also interesting to note that the vote of the birds doesn't seem to matter, right? I don't really think that. I'm not sure if the birds even had come up with a definitive answer, if that would have swayed the goddess of love. I think that giving the choice to the female at the end is an interesting gambit, but we'll talk about that more. Yes, Sarah says, I think the choice in voting out of order was purposeful, but like you, I'm not precisely sure what the purpose was. Dr. Parker, yeah, and I'll just reiterate, I think it's just a comic descent into chaos, that birds that are as wacky as ducks and geese especially cannot be expected to keep order or to follow decorum. And so that's what we're witnessing, I think. But I think anybody could be right about that. Okay, good. Let's see if I can navigate the forum a little bit more easily this week. I'm not real swift with it sometimes. We have Becca's response next. Right, you've given it to the first eagle, the noblest, the humblest, the most respectful of the lady eagle. The affection seemed genuine, and yes, she did react to him. You're right about that. I think that her feelings are telegraphed there a little bit, and we don't know if she didn't react to anybody else, but that is the one that we see. So I don't know, Eagle One. Y'all are very impressed by humility in these eagles, and humility is definitely a big part of chivalry. I think it goes. I think it can go too far, though. I think that a knight was expected to be humble, but be making humble brags. To sort of be humble in an assertive way. And I think there's a chance he's being too lowly with this, but I don't know. I can certainly read it your way for sure. The gates, right? I think this is not a question upon which there's going to be a lot of disagreement. The two separate sides are what people experience in love. You're either going to have a good time or a bad one, right? It's hard to be lukewarm in love. It's either a beautiful experience or it's an awful one, or it's a beautiful one until it's an awful one, which is also what can happen. Yeah, I agree with that. You say in this second paragraph here, the order on the gate implies that people have a choice, so maybe it's more of a call for the potential lover to make better decisions, that you can, pick them a little more wisely if you can, and Chaucer maybe is implying that you can. The narrator being pretty oblivious. I guess this is the. Hold on, now which question? Wait a minute, which question is that? Okay, the narrator being oblivious, he observes the way things go. I didn't catch much of reflection. Oh, the certain thing. Yes, the certain thing. No, we don't. The narrator. Yeah, it's interesting. The narrator is still, I think, dopey Chaucer, dopey Geoffrey. Maybe the same guy from House of Fame. Maybe even the same guy from Book of the Duchess. And so, no, he's not going to learn something. And the idea at the end, he's sent away to go and look back at his books. Although Chaucer, as we've seen and as we'll see, especially further in the Canterbury Tales, is very interested in the question of authority versus experience. And the Chaucer narrator so far seems to always err on the side of authority. In other words, he wants to learn things by reading them from books. more than he wants to, or at least is able to learn them by experiencing them firsthand. So yeah, I think at the end he's kind of it's kind of there's the poem's kind of disdainful of him, uh, as you would expect. Um, and as you say, it's not. It's like he wasn't even offended when nature called him stupid. Yeah, just like the eagle, that not the eagle in this poem, but the eagle in the House of Fame makes fun of him and calls him stupid, and he pretty much just hangs his head and agrees. The Chaucer narrator. The hierarchy of birds here. Yeah, the waterfowl really are given a bad name. The geese, the ducks, um, and but yeah, as you say, if you've got experience with them, if you've ever lived anywhere with a lake, geese and ducks can be aggressive and obnoxious without actually ever being sort of fierce or impressive. And yeah, I don't know if I would say the strongest birds are on top and the weaker ones come after, because I think there are water birds that are definitely sort of bigger and stronger than a lot of the sea birds, or even some of the worm birds. But I think it's what you feed on that determines it. But I think that Chaucer was also pretty set on putting the waterfowl at the bottom of that list. Number five, it was an easier read. Yes, it was, and it's not because it's easier work. It's just the House of Fame was a partly deliberately, but maybe not entirely confusingly written text, and part of it is to baffle you, but part of it is just the way that Chaucer was writing at that point in his life. And I think here you're seeing a fully developed poet who can write with elegance and wit and brevity, and do it in a sophisticated rhyme and meter scheme. He's just more grown up as a poet at this point, and I'm glad you like it better. And I think that if you like this better, then you certainly will like Canterbury Tales better, because they're a product of an even later period than this. The wide gates. Julie points this as the first person to point this out. Wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction. And yes, indeed, Chaucer uses that term, wide gates, and Chaucer knows his scripture. So I don't know. I had never thought of that, but certainly the gate to the Garden of Love can be the gate to the way that leads to destruction, as the gate itself says. So I like that you pointed that out, and that's not something I had seen before or thought about before. So if you're, I don't, but is everybody who enters the Garden of Love doomed, regardless that it's incompatible with salvation? I don't know if I think Chaucer's willing to say that, but I wouldn't put it past him either. Especially this kind of love that we're seeing, which is kind of an obsessed, passionate slash dangerous, obsessive kind of love. So maybe you're right. I don't know, but I think the wide gate is certainly conspicuous, and wide maybe is a word that was used to fill out a meter or make a rhyme, but maybe not. Yeah. Now here's an interesting point that Susanna points out, that you pointed out. Um, Please don't think I'm a cynic. We don't think you're cynic, Susanna. Uh, Eagle number one is very shy and quiet, but he's also the one that speaks first. So is he right? Is he proud of his humility? Which I think maybe goes back to what I was saying earlier. This idea that you're supposed to be humble, but not too humble. Maybe he's bragging it up too much with humility in this case. And I don't know if I know why the eagles speak in the order that they speak as opposed to just the birds. But it is interesting to think about, and he certainly is the one that speaks up first. I also have trouble believing that Chaucer would favor whoever Chaucer's favorite eagle is. I have trouble believing he would make him speak the first. It just doesn't, from a literary point of view, doesn't seem to pan out that the first one is the best one. But maybe so. Maybe so. The talking gate. I would see a talking gate. It seems like Chaucer's got a soapbox about the unteachable reader. Um, Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. Now, I don't know. I don't ever feel like he has disdain for us, for his audience. He does seem to have sometimes disdain for himself, if by himself I mean the narrator. Um, but I do think he is saying something about the idea that reading only is going to teach you so much. There's reading, but then there's actual experiences, which is the thing that you're gonna learn from, and maybe the limitations of authority, which is an interesting commentary coming from somebody who's a writer. But it doesn't mean that's in any way wrong or inconceivable that he would say that. No, I think it's kind of interesting, the idea of a writer talking about the limitations of reading, at least as a way of learning about life. So maybe it takes an author to write a book to tell us to get our nose out of the books and get outside and talk to real people. And yes, geese are mean. They hiss, they pinch, they bite, they do all kinds of things that are pretty unpleasant. So good. All right, I'm gonna see if I can break recordings here and move on to the next one.